Hello. Welcome as you are coming in. We are so happy to see so many of you arriving now. We'll give it a couple more minutes, like maybe one, and then we'll go ahead and get started. We'll get you all in, let you have a seat, get comfortable, then we'll start. All right, we're at 39. Awesome. All right, so that we will not, we want to make sure that we have enough time for Lynn to be able to share with us and to have some questions. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to each and every one of you to Coach Transformation Academy Community of Practice. We are so excited that you are all here. And we're even more excited to have Miss Lynne Hirschman with us. And let me just tell you very briefly about her because she's going to be able to share and she'll take some time and share about who she is. But let me tell you what I know. So Lynne is a coach, a craniosacral therapist, a physical therapist, and a 30-year student of social and spiritual sciences. She studied psychology, theology, and personal development since 1990. And when personal injuries led her to craniosacral treatment 6 years later, she learned forms of spiritual healing for solutions to physical, mental, and emotional challenges. So that right there just lets you know that we are in for a wonderfully informative treat. So Lynn, without further ado, I'm turning it over to you.
Okay, thank you, Franda, and thank you for that generously nice introduction. I wanted to thank you and Dr. Harris and Soham and the Coach Transformation Academy for this opportunity to be here today. And I hope that since I'm relatively new with the official title of coach, I hope that everybody here can at least get one good takeaway, although some of it may be redundant for some of you. And I'm using the sailing boat as the illustration here for the balance, because that's something I learned to do before I went to college and studied biology and then went to graduate school in physical therapy. And it gave me a very good kinesthetic sense for balance, using different physical means to balance different factors. And if any of you have sailed, you know that you not only have to figure out your target for your destination, but you've got to figure out the direction and speed of the strength of the wind and take into account the construction of your boat and the size of your sail or sails. You may have more than one. And do all that and maybe take some zigzag path to get to your target and try not to tip your boat over. So anyway, that's where I get this analogy. And talents is a word we use here in the United States quite a bit. Other people use the word strengths. And so just wanted to make that clarification in case we have a cultural difference there with talents and balance. Also, just wanted to say that I grew up in a home and also had relatives in my extended family who were all really sound business leaders. And they were in different industries, including healthcare. So I learned early on what good business principles look like and how good leaders functioned. I didn't always execute this perfectly when I was new in some roles, but I am a reflective person. So I did learn quickly when I wasn't doing things well. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, page down was working before. It is not working now. Soham, any clues here?
Click on the PPT and try to change it.
Thank you. Perfect. Thanks. So just a little bit about me, because the context out of which my official coaching has evolved is maybe different than some other people. I came out of the medical model context, which is, for me, always was about the client being complete and resourceful and creative, but that isn't how a lot of medical model people operate necessarily. So I've been a physical therapist for over 30 years. So that meant I was assessing people's physical function in hospitals, in schools, in clinics, all different ages and all different diagnoses. Unless you've had physical therapy, you may or may not realize that the physical therapist also is assessing mental and emotional function while they're working with you, because in order to partner with someone to improve their physical function, at least for me, you have to be able to get a sense of what motivates someone. Why do they want to be able to walk again, or maybe for the first time? And I was managing the care plans for my patients, managing support staff, also creating the treatment plans, and then constantly assessing our progress toward them. And sometimes that assessment, again, included emotional and mental factors, because I'm partnering with them to help them get somewhere. I also had a lot of skills in research. So I helped a group of orthopedic surgeons to expand their research department. And when that was completed, then I started seeing more children again and working in adult care, but also besides the acute care referral hospital where I was working, I also worked in some outpatient clinics where we treated adults with brain injuries, and the leaders of our teams were neuropsychologists. And I also worked in a hand and wrist outpatient clinic run by a highly trained specialist. So I'm not, excuse me for a second here. So continuing to mentally and emotionally assess people, particularly in that neuropsychology clinic, despite the fact that these clients were meeting with their neuropsychologist often, and we had team conferencing every week, clients were still sharing a lot of personal information with me. And this led me to take a class in counseling, which I took in so that I could understand patients better. And it did help in that regard. And I was very careful not to do psychology. I'm not credentialed in that field. Then, as Franda mentioned, I had a personal injury, and that led me to find craniosacral therapy, where it's a little more similar to the coaching model of conceptualizing your client as complete, resourceful, and creative. It's still in the medical model somewhat. And at the, like my journey, I had come to the end of finding success in the conventional model. So I was attracting patients who also had tried everything that was available in the conventional system and had gone outside that to find it. I started a private practice because the clinics where I was working kept getting bought up by bigger and bigger companies, and that was not conducive to me providing the treatment in the way that I wanted, or my colleagues. They all left over time too. So again, people who have been frustrated by the conventional system, there's a little more sometimes mental and emotional overlay. So I'm continually assessing this. During the time I was running my private practice, I was a leader on a couple of boards, volunteer boards. So I served as treasurer, as president, and learned more about how teams function or don't function well. And was running, along with my board, I was running a large facility on a college campus for almost 100 young ladies who were attending that college. And we were providing their room and board and all the staff, managing the staff that it takes to do that. And running that as well as my private practice meant that I was wearing a lot of the hats in my private practice, all of the hats, including marketing, including receiving the payments, because people paid me cash in my private practice. I did not accept insurance, and having difficult conversations with either staff and or with clients. So because I come from this physical therapy background, and that's the basis from which my coaching has evolved, I'm just going to go through a little bit about physical balance at work, because for me, I don't work well unless I make my environment and my body comfortable. So as you can see, that's what Brenda has already mentioned. And again, it's okay to interrupt if we have questions that need clarifying as we go. So today, and we're talking about talents and balance, I'm first going to talk about the physical aspects of work. And then when we talk about balancing the coaching aspects of dealing with clients, then we will, I'll talk more about that model and how mine has shifted over time, which I consciously was getting out of that expert and consultation mode and more into the coaching model per se. Okay, so here, I've got some photographs here, and we'll just go through them real briefly. These two individuals are, to me, look in pretty good positions as far as physical comfort, which will help them stay efficient for longer periods of time. The good things here are the screen heights are almost eye level, so they're not having to look up or down. Their forearms are parallel to the ground, which makes for comfort at the wrist, elbows, shoulders, upper body. Both of them are a little bit forward of where a neutral spine would be most comfortable. The gentleman in the front of that picture, both his shoulders and his head are a little bit farther forward, but his trunk is leaning nicely on the back of that chair. And that allows for more comfort for a longer period of time. The individual at the back part of that photograph, he's leaning forward all the way from the hips up, and that will become tiring over time. And the timing part on this is a factor too, because if they're just there in that position for 5 minutes and then they go to a standing desk, that's one thing. If they're at this position for 3 hours, that's another. Okay, I'm going to dispel some myths here. The gentleman in the upper right-hand corner is actually in a great position that I use myself a lot, and I couldn't find a picture where the chair goes all the way up the back of the head, because when I assume this position, that's what I do. I make sure I have even my head supported. And this can feel really good. And people often consider, at least in my country, this is considered a lazy or poor posture, not good for your body. But in fact, it is really a nice break position for a lot of people, including me. The gentleman there in the middle of the upper row is in a nice break position for a while. It wouldn't be comfortable for me for very long because he's looking down at that screen and he doesn't have any back support. But it's nice that he's out and not in an office. The people on the upper left are probably very intent on what they're doing. It wouldn't be great for anyone over a long period of time because there'd be so many physical adaptations, either muscles being too shortened or too lengthened to be comfortable. And for me, then it would become inefficient rather quickly. The lady on that lower left is actually in a position that I try to use a lot. And if I don't have a sofa around, I just find something that I could put under my feet, ankles, or knees. And if she were going to add a laptop, she could put pillows on her lap. Might be easier maybe without the baby bump, but I really like to show this position. And she might even want some support under her elbows. Gentleman in the middle of that lower row is in a really pretty decent position in that his one foot at least is flat on the floor, his thighs are parallel to the ground. There's great support for the trunk and for that left arm. The eye level of the screen isn't too low, but I'd switch between that one and the one before probably if I had those pieces of furniture. And then the bottom right, the lady standing, that's actually a great position. And I don't know how many of you have the opportunity to work in that position, but it's very good. And I could not find a photograph showing the optimal foot position to use when you're standing. But that is to have one foot at a higher level than the other. And it doesn't matter which foot, and it doesn't matter how long. And I switch from foot to foot when I'm in a standing desk position. All right, I don't want to belabor that because I know we're here to talk about coaching, but I did want to bring that up because it may be something that coaches don't think about when working with clients, because sometimes a productivity issue at work or a lack of enjoyment does involve a physical feature of the way the workstation is set up. And I find that people are not cognizant of that often, and it would be very important to me for not only for myself, but as a physical therapist, I can't help but think about what would be comfortable and most bodily efficient and pain-free for someone. All right, so we're going to go on now and talk a little bit about balancing with our coaching clients. And this, for me, always requires self-awareness. And we have tools we can use to develop self-awareness, which will support the balance. And assessments are some of those tools, and we'll talk about those in a minute. But the other ways that I'm aware of, I'm sure there's more, are coaching, personal development groups, individual and group therapy, and our own personal work experiences. I know just want to mention a little more on the personal development groups. I have a lot of experience in that, and both as a participant and a leader, and in coaching other individuals one-on-one. And at a Coach Transformation Academy presentation last year, I heard one of your presenters speak on a movement. I think she was coming from the Middle East, not my country. And she talked about conscious parenting. And I was unfamiliar with that label or that group, but it sounded a lot like personal development work that I've been involved in here in the United States. And then I just wanted to give one example of some coaching work I did there involving self-awareness. Was working with a lady who is a mother of 4 and functions very highly, functions as pretty much as a single parent in terms of wearing all the hats in that household. And she had a very high level of self-awareness in many aspects of her life and her children's lives. So I didn't really have much radar going on for that, but I did begin to notice that she was verbalizing more consistently a strong bias, positive bias toward one of the children and a strong not positive bias toward another. And so when she began to appear open to receiving feedback that I could offer, I did offer, and just simply asked her to, whatever the pertinent content was that day, I just asked her to imagine herself saying that to the one child, and then imagine herself saying that to the other. And immediately she became self-aware of the bias, and then she could do the personal work that implied needed to be done. So it just was a good lesson for me that even when someone has very good self-awareness in many aspects of their life, they still can have dips in that need to be helped. And the opportunity for that seemed to arise when it was time, when she was ready to receive ways I could offer assistance. Okay. Add to that, Dr. Otto Lasky, who is a psychologist and coach. He has an institute in the northeastern part of the United States, and he has published quite a bit. He said that to have a successful outcome in coaching, the personal development level of the coach had to be equal to or greater than the personal developmental level of the client. And this is not to imply that there's a chronological age association here at all, because I don't find that there's necessarily a correspondence there between age and personal development level. So I don't want to sound like this is a prejudicial reflection. Okay, and I forgot to mention, I have edited my slideshow a little more since the one that you may have received. In fact, I'm sure. So bear with me here, and I will see. Yeah, this, you have this slide farther down in the version that you have. And this is referring to the work by Patrick Lencioni and his more recent assessment work on 6 types of working genius. And these are some labels that he and his team came up with after some trial and error and some challenges in their organization. And I'm not promoting this or selling this. I just learned about it recently and I thought it was interesting and helpful. And according to him, there are these 6 types of working genius. And by genius, he means a God-given gift. And he believes that we each have 2 types of working genius, 2 types from this list of working competencies, and from this list, 2 types of working frustrations. And that for our benefit and the benefit of our organizations, it's good to know what our 2 working geniuses are so that we can find jobs that can utilize those, but also that an organization can make sure they have all 6 of these bases covered. And so here's some examples from him in a podcast that is available on the website andystanley.com, in case you're interested. Anyway, he has 2 co-founders of his group called Table Group, and his 2 working competencies do not include galvanization. Or excuse me, I haven't explained the 6 types. Okay, so wonder is that person who loves to sit back and ponder situations and consider where there's a current missing opportunity for an organization. And they don't mind sitting still and thinking for long periods of time. The invention piece is someone who loves coming up with novel solutions, even if they don't need one. And the discernment component is provided by someone who has very good gut instincts about assessing the feasibility or non-feasibility of an idea or a product. And they're very good at giving advice. Their advice is good. Tenacity, he actually has at the end of his list. But it is the component of a team where a person is very satisfied by finishing projects or books. He himself said he does not have that one. And his wife doesn't either, and I'll tell you about that in a minute. Okay, so the galvanization piece. This is someone who can come in and motivate, inspire, and recruit people to work toward a goal. And the enablement part is having someone who is able to come alongside that galvanizer, let's say, and support people in getting the work done. It's not the same as tenacity, where someone loves completing a job. It's the support, the assistance piece. And in I don't know about your countries, but my country, the United States, this sometimes has enablement, sometimes has a poor connotation because it's often associated with the stigma of someone who doesn't behave healthily in the face of having a relationship with someone with an addiction problem. So I want to make sure we know he's not referring to that. Okay, so in Patrick's team of 3, he and his 2 co-founders, it was found that his working competencies not genius, his working competencies included galvanization. And that was higher on the scale than his 2 co-founders who had galvanization as working frustrations. So when he came to work, this was before he developed this assessment tool, he ended up being the galvanizer simply because he scored a little bit higher than the other 2. So none of them were great at that. And they realized then that they needed to find someone who could fill that function. So that's an example of this tool on a team level. Another team, he and his wife, is that, as I mentioned, both of them have tenacity in their working frustrations profile. So that means sometimes bills don't get paid, and that did actually happen. But the beauty of this for him, he said, was that because they both know this about each other, they don't tend to go into blame mode or anger mode when something doesn't happen, like bill getting paid. Excuse me a minute. Okay, and his bias, of course it's his tool, is that this assessment removes some of the personal or personality stigmas that sometimes arise when people are referring to their Myers-Briggs profile or their DISC profile. And so he thinks people are going to be more willing to not only take the assessment, but then to share their results, which is then how a team is able to balance out, make sure they have all 6 covered. And of course, it is more useful for the individual when they're job seeking. Maybe they'll be more apt to say this. Again, this is his bias. I'm just telling you what I learned in a podcast. My own reflection on this was that it would be a nice complement to the parts of the DISC where the DISC report talks about the natural style and one's adaptive style, and noticing if there's a tension there. And I think this could be a nice augmentation to that, or complement, however you want to conceptualize that, for understanding what might be a tension between a natural and an adaptive style. Okay. So just a little visual break there. another way to think about balancing. Each of these birds has to be able to have the skills within themselves balanced enough to be able to fly. They also have to have some other skills to be able to balance that out with flying with a team of birds. Okay, we'll switch gears now to the DISC and motivators, continue to talk about assessments a little bit. And I should maybe take a little break here to say that my own experience with assessments, as I've already mentioned, with clients in the physical realm, I constantly am assessing their motivation levels, their mental and emotional states, because that's helpful to us achieving our physical goals. So I am careful. I don't coach my physical therapy clients, my craniosacral clients. But I have had a long history with the other kind of assessment too, in terms of maybe ones that aren't so popular anymore. But in seminary, it was a requirement that the faculty member, well, there were many PhD psychology persons there, but the one in charge of testing had to test all the students who were on their way to getting degrees. So I had to take the MMPI that I don't even know is used much anymore, and a couple of others that I don't recall. But over the last 20, 30 years, I have taken the Myers-Briggs a few times. And just, again, for a personal example of balance, when I first took that, 3 of the 4 scales, I was right down the middle. It was balanced. But my introvert-extrovert scale was very heavily toward the introvert scale. And I had good social skills because I'd learned them, but my way of being was very heavily introverted. And my way of re-energizing is very much introverted. But just in casual settings later on, when I took the Myers-Briggs, I eventually had that scale balance out too. And I don't think this was a matter of test teaching. I just think it was a natural evolution of my personal development, that scale came into balance for me. So more recently, because I decided to get the official credentials to be able to coach with people, I was exposed to these other assessments that I had not had before, including DISC and motivators. And there you can see the reference. I'm not selling this group at the bottom there. I'm just letting you know where I got this information. So probably a lot of you are familiar with the DISC, and you know that measures observable behavior and emotion. And you know that the motivators assessment measures values that drive behavior and emotion. And this comes with a really lengthy report. I think it was about 54 pages. It included graphs and lots of text, and probably lots of you know this. And behavioral descriptions in the report are tendencies. And as most of you probably know, DISC is the acronym for dominance, influence, steadiness, and conscientious. And there is the chart used with permission from Assessment 24/7. And I'll give you a minute to just look at the descriptors here, because my coaching training had these groups of characteristics with different labels, but same grouping. And here are, and your slide, the slide display that you all have is probably a little different in the order here. And you probably have a few extra slides that I have removed since I sent that on Friday or Saturday. Okay, so here are the 4 types listed out. These are their words, these broad brush quoted types. The open types, green and the yellow, the guarded types in the red and the blue, and those really cursory labels at the bottom there, whether they're fast or slow and involve people or tasks. Those are their words from their report. And as most of you know, the report also tells you about your adapted style and has a nice graph showing your perception of the behavioral tendencies that you think you need to display to be successful in your focus situation. And then it also shows a natural style, which is measures the intensity of your instinctive behaviors and what will show up when you're in a stressful situation. And as I mentioned earlier, when I took mine, and that was rather recently, mine was, they were the same. I don't think mine would have been the same if I had taken that a few decades ago, just knowing that some of the tensions I had with work situations, and I didn't have a label to say what those tensions were. Now I do. Okay, so I'm just to wrap up the DISC portion here. Some benefits that I see are that these assessments can bring an awareness of people's tendencies that they may not have. And I know, even though I think I have a good level of self-awareness and I've invested heavily in personal development for the last, 20 years, I still found it helpful to read through this report because it helped me appreciate some of my characteristics. It also made me understand differences I may have with other people and ways that I have a functioning that are unique that I sometimes thought were more universal. So the awareness piece was there for me, largely about, oh, there's this other way that someone might function. So it was a great way to bring me more awareness, a great springboard for conversation. And in my current situation, helped me know that I don't have a lot of tension between my adapted and natural styles. Okay, now I'm going to give a couple of real specific examples from a blog I recently found called Leadership Freak. And again, not pushing this, I just found it a useful source for information. And I actually had an experience with a leader who supervised me that had categories from both of these. So I may flip back and forth a little bit between these two slides. So this individual had two supportive characteristics. This person did not ask people to do difficult things, or they did pressure people without consideration of the workload. They definitely did want to avoid inconveniencing anyone. They definitely were frustrated when other people didn't help. And because they spent so much time helping, I won't flip slides, but there's some things on the challenging slide that are helpful here. So they were spending so much time helping, not enough time training and developing people and stretching them, that they were actually encouraging dependence and thereby inadvertently implying that other people were incompetent. So again, that maybe someone is consistently this way, but I happen to work with an individual who, and I wasn't their coach officially. I did end up providing some coaching functions. when the situation allowed or warranted, but that wasn't my hired position when I had this person for a boss. Okay, the same person had those at times. The same person also had these, functions at some times. Sometimes they pressured people without considering their current workload. They were very results oriented, often, not always, but often. And so they neglected the training and development piece because they wanted to get work done. And they wanted other people, including me, to get work done. And they expected people to perform from weakness. Again, results focused. They didn't complain out loud a lot, but when they did, it became apparent that there was an undercurrent constantly of being disappointed that people weren't rising to higher standards. And this just naturally invited resistance, and their pushing people without supporting them resulted in people pushing back or leaving, and causes fatigue. And those are from Leadership Freak again. And just another nature analogy for balance. Bees, I think, are fascinating to me. They can fly long distances during the day outdoors and find targets with particular scents or odors. And then they return to a box. At least this is how they are cared for in my country. They return to a box without light inside. And they work on these minute physical structures, which they build, and then they use to nurture young and create honey, as we all know. So I just think they're also, like birds, are a great example of balance in breadth of skills and balancing them in productive ways. So we have talked about physical aspects of work, how to look at how I look at the body and think about the time involved in different positions and why that might be a part of talking about coaching issues, because I find it helpful even just to observe what a natural position that somebody chooses at their workstation sometimes tells me a bit about what's going on with them mentally and or emotionally. If they're putting themselves in suffering, what I would consider positions of bodily suffering to achieve certain tasks. And then we talked a little bit about assessments. And again, I'm not pushing any of the ones I mentioned today. I just, since I'm a relatively new coach officially, I am still learning and loving gathering that information. And then I talked a little bit about facilitating balance within yourself and the fact that personal development is what I see as the way to continually improve my self-awareness. And I figure I will be working on that as long as I am on this earth. So I hope that was helpful in some ways to each one here. And you should have this also, which just gives you the references I used in preparing for this. And I think that is all. So I will try to unshare here. Okay.
I think you're still sharing. There we go.
There. Okay. I'm not anymore, right?
It took a minute. That was really awesome, Lynn. And there was so much information. I was taking notes as we were going along. But first, I'll just open it up. Does anyone have any questions, thoughts, concerns? Even about the beginning part, that physical therapy part, the way we sit. I kept trying to straighten myself to make sure that I was sitting correctly. So,
well, hopefully my hope was by going through that to dispel some, I don't know how other people's countries are at the social messages about this, but in the United States, we have a lot of messages about the proper way we need to be sitting. And while I find that a lot of those are nice ideas, they don't fit everyone. And they don't fit everyone for long periods of time. So, you know, when people are in meetings a lot, maybe that ideal posture is a good idea, but maybe it's also nice when people can stand and take a break, and when people can slouch and not have it be frowned upon.
Yeah.
So that's what I want to get across, is that the rules that are in popular culture are not really all that great. There are benefits to all those positions I showed. So.
Well, I think I've tried every single one of them. So. So I see that we are all still not on camera. So if anyone wants to come on video and ask any questions, this would be your time before we get ready to log out. So I see a couple of messages saying good session, and it absolutely was.
Oh.
I did.
I'm sorry, I didn't read the chat.
Yeah, right now it hasn't been any questions yet.
Okay,
but
great.
I do have one. You mentioned about the standing, and you said 1 foot higher than the other. How do you do that when you're standing?
It depends on if it's not a situation that I have control of, which is frequently the case, then I look around and see what's there. If there's a 2x4, piece of wood, I use a 2x4. If there's a footstool, I use a footstool. If there's a book, it doesn't have to be large. It can be small, as long as there's a difference between your right and left foot, and it doesn't matter if it's the right or left foot being up. And sometimes if I'm in a standing position for a long period of time, I'll move the book or 2x4 or footstool to the other side and switch.
Okay, so now I'll have to practice that as well. I did buy, you can't see it, but I did buy a standing computer desk. So at least I'm in the right direction. Now I just need to prop 1 foot up.
Very good.
Unless anyone has any further questions, then we're going to go ahead and log out. So I see a lot of thanks in the chat. Great session I'm reading. Good informative session. Wonderful session. So a lot of thanks and great session that we're getting in the chat. Also there in the chat, for those of you that would like to watch this video later, Soham has put in the chat the links to the webinar on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, YouTube, and Twitter. I think you could find us now most anywhere. So be sure to check those out as well. Also, someone says, thanks a lot for this information. Thanks for organizing the session. Great session. Lots to ponder upon, they said. Thank you.
I'm seeing the chat, so thanks.
Okay, yeah. So again, so we will, if you don't have any questions, we'll go ahead and close out. Next week, we will have Dr. Ann Clancy, PhD, who is an executive coach, and she will be joining us this time next week at 7:30 GST. So we look forward to seeing you all here next week as well. So thank you so much, Lynn. Thank all of you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next time.